Hey everyone, welcome to This Week in People. This Week in People is supported by our friends at PIN, the employee communications tool for the distributed workplace. Let's dig right in. So, lots to cover this week. I want to start following up something from last week's episode, which is based on how companies should be responding to employees who were participating in the insurrection at the Capitol. This Fast Company piece by Sarah Morgan actually gets into some practical tips with lots of interviews from employee attorneys and other professionals in the space with advice on how companies should be dealing with the aftermath of the insurrection, and I think tips that will apply to similar situations should they arise in the future. So definitely check out Sarah's piece in Fast Company. The next thing I want to share with you is actually some really interesting data from Kim Mai Cutler at Initialized. We've been hearing a lot about the exodus to San Francisco with the pandemic and distributed work, and this is actually a really interesting post because she pulls a lot of data from their portfolio. The post itself actually gets into how founders are thinking about structuring their work on, both now and on the other side of the pandemic, whenever that might be. Looking at either, hub and spoke models, hybrid models, co-located models, and interestingly also kind of where people are going. So this was some really interesting data around founders. If they were to start their company today, what would that look like? And you can see the amount of people that are focused on distributed work, I think, is significant and certainly a pretty drastic shift from how that question would have been answered last year. So definitely check that out. On the VC side, sticking with that theme, George Laroque, who's one of my go-to analysts in HR tech, has developed a lot of really interesting reports on VC spending in the HR tech sector. And he's got a very robust report getting into exactly where those dollars are going, quarterly trends of VC, and you can watch the numbers, spiking, took a bit of a hit, last year and then climbed again. So we're absolutely seeing tremendous amounts of capital being invested into the HR tech space. If this interests you, definitely subscribe to George's newsletter on work tech because he's an ongoing source of information on who's getting funded, what the trends are, and certainly one of my go-to analysts in the space. Smart recruiters. For those of you that listen to the podcast, last year you probably heard the conversation that I had with their CEO and founder, Jerome Turnick, about their effort to become an anti-racist force in the industry. Well, this is one of the first products as a result of that developed with their new Chief Diversity Officer, Rocky. And it's actually a really interesting audit and assessment blueprint tool where anybody can go in, they can take the assessment, it will audit, it'll guide you through a series of questions that will audit your existing efforts around building a inclusive workforce, and then it'll give you some recommendations. So this is free for anybody to use, so I think the majority of listeners out there interested in building a more inclusive organization, hopefully that is every one of you, this is a great free tool that will help and guide those efforts. I want to get into a couple things around kind of hybrid and remote. Obviously, that's a big trend of what we're thinking about right now. This piece in MIT Sloan is worth your time. It gets into some of the principles around hybrid work for productivity. And they get into a couple different areas that I think we need to be focusing on when we're thinking about intentionally designing hybrid work strategies. So like all of these shows, all of the links to the articles I'm walking you through will be in the show notes. So I'll make it easy for you to find those and definitely encourage you to go deeper. The next piece is actually a similar theme from HBR on 9 trends that will shape work in 2021 and beyond. And so it's going to get into a lot of things that we've been talking about really over the last year heavily. But one of the things that I wanted to flag is really the kind of shifting focus on the time that work gets done. We talk a lot about where work gets done, and we're starting to talk more about when work gets done. And this idea of a 40 plus hour work week around set timelines of 9 to 5. For knowledge workers, that's not really relevant anymore. It doesn't really matter where and when. To an extent, you have to have some common overlap availability for meetings and coordination and collaboration. But the idea of having to be in a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday role is kind of outdated now. And so this gets into that and other things in this article, so definitely worth your time. But this is a remote set, podcast set actually from Pillar Venture Capital, and they have some sound bites from Katie Burke from HubSpot, their Chief People Officer, and others talking about different aspects of remote work and how to optimize for that. So I love the way they put this together. It's kind of like a DJ playlist, so to speak. They extracted these clips specific to remote out of longer podcasts, I'm assuming, but you can kind of cycle through these and you see on the right navigation, these are the questions that the individuals are answering. So worth a few minutes of your time. For those of you that don't live in a disconnected non-Wi-Fi internet world, you realize that in the United States, we welcomed a new administration this week. The Biden-Harris administration took over, and on day one, Joe Biden issued this executive order on advancing racial equity in the federal government and how that's going to trickle out to other areas outside in terms of vendors and partners of the government. So again, a complete 180 from some of the policies and executive orders you saw from the past administration. So the first few days are certainly a pretty clear indicator that this administration will be prioritizing representation and inclusion, and so this is the first step of what I expect will be more that we'll be seeing over the coming weeks. The next piece I want to get into is a new piece from Josh Burson on employee experience. So Josh is one of the leading analysts in the space. Obviously, he's been driving the conversation around modern HR for years. And similar to how he breaks down stages that we go through in HR, whether it's performance or learning or HR tech, he's taking that similar approach to kind of deconstructing employee experience over phases. So again, I think employee experience is going to be a massive part of HR for both now and into our future. So this article is definitely worth your time. And this was a piece that I loved. Katie Burke, I'm a huge fan of hers, HubSpot's Chief People Officer. She wrote an incredibly detailed post on how to get a job at HubSpot. And she wrote it on Medium on her own post. There's a link in the show notes, but really gets into deep detail on questions, how to prepare, what to expect, what to research, what they look for. And to me, this is the kind of content, this is the kind of post that I think any Chief People Officer, CHRO out there watching this should be creating for your organization. Why not make it as easy as possible for prospects to have a clear understanding of what that interview will look like, what you look for, all the things that will allow them to bring their very best self and represent themselves in that way in the interview, and allow you to basically make the decision as to how they align or not based on the very best representation that they can bring. So hat tip to HubSpot and Katie specifically for that post. Definitely something that I encourage you to read and replicate in your own orgs. And then the last piece of content I want to go over this week is an adaptation of my upcoming Redefining HR book called 10 Keys to Building a Career as a Modern HR Operator. This was based on hundreds of interviews I've had with HR executives, coupled with my own direct experience and career over the last 20 years. And it really breaks down some of the fundamental, truths, traits, however you want to frame them, that you really need to be a modern HR operator today. So this is, I go into more detail in the closing chapter of Redefining HR, but this will give you a little preview of what to expect. And I imagine for a lot of you watching, probably you'll be able to see yourselves in many of these traits. And lastly, did I mention that I've got a book publishing on Tuesday? Yes, I do. You're probably tired of hearing me talk about it. I will talk about it a lot more for at least another 2 weeks, and then I will talk about it a bit less. But I am having a kickoff party, and you are all invited. So Tuesday is the launch party. I'm actually going to be having a fireside chat with Caitlin Holloway, one of the founding partners at 776, and a good friend. She actually is the author of the foreword for the book. And we're going to sit down and just talk about the book writing process, where it came from, what I learned, what modern HR is looking like today. So if you're interested in attending and joining us live, be sure to RSVP and be sure to show up a few minutes early. The tool that I'm using has the seats capped at 150 attendees. That's by design. I wanted to keep it more intimate and interactive. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So if you're interested in that on Tuesday, be sure to RSVP and be sure to join the room early to secure your seat. So that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with more news. And until then, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.